And today is Thursday, September 29th, and we're going to talk about culture and reading. We're going to talk a little bit about Michael Faraday. We talk about luck and serendipity, superstition, and we'll talk about poetry, and we'll be reading some fragments from the great anthology, which I have here, The Limits of Art, edited by CAIRNS, which is really a magnificent, unusual anthology of literature. I have many nice anthologies, and this is an anthology of poetry, but also prose, which is very interesting. I was thinking the other day, read a very interesting article about Faraday, and everyone should know who Michael Faraday is. Michael Faraday, he was contemporaneous with Washington and John Quincy Adams and even Lincoln. He was a great scientist. He lived from 1791 to 1867. And his birthday was last week. And if you didn't know what Faraday did, you should know. If there were no Faraday, there would be no modern economy or technology. He was a former bookbinder, had studied magnetics. In 1820, just a year before the death of Napoleon, he noted that electricity applied to a loop of wire to get a magnet to move through it. And inside produced the electric motor found in every fan, vacuum cleaner, washing machine, and electric car. He then turned his own thinking inside out. In 1831, he invented the dynamo, which is a Greek word for power, an inverse motor. Moving a loop of wires around a fixed magnet can induce electricity. Place the dynamo next to running water, like Niagara Falls, and you can generate reliable electricity. So think about it, how the world has changed since the 19th century. No Faraday, no communications. No running electricity down a long wire to an electrical magnetic relay switch, and you have no electricity. You can't ring any bell. So this idea of running a wire down an electromagnetic relay switch, allowing it to ring a bell, became a telegraph. And later the telephone, and then all of today's wireless devices. So no Faraday, no telephone, no telegraph, no computers. Absolutely amazing. So we're lucky to live in the age post-Faraday. And I was thinking the other day about the importance of luck. So I'm lucky to be alive and lucky to live in the post-Faraday age. Otherwise, I'd just be talking to myself in a little room. This way, perhaps you can listen to me, or even my children or grandchildren at some future time. That's why one of the reasons I write anything at all now is so that I can have something left for my grandchildren who are very small, and so maybe someday they'll listen and get to know their grandfather a little bit more. Groucho Marx once said, "If a black cat crosses your path, it signifies that the animal is going somewhere." Someone else said, "Life is like a game of cards. Reliability is the ace, industry the king, politeness the queen, thrift the jack, common sense to best advantage the cards you draw. And every day as the game proceeds, you will find the ace, the king, the queen, the jack in your hand and an opportunity to use them." This is Edgar Watson Howe. And so many times we refer to cards when we refer to luck, like it's not in the cards. But it's true. I mean, there certainly is a lot of luck, but you also play your cards. "Only I have no luck anymore, but who knows, maybe today. Every day is a new day. It is better to be lucky, but I would rather be exact. When luck comes, you are ready. And this is Hemingway from The Old Man and the Sea. And it's true that you have to be ready for your luck. And in some sense, we do make our own luck. George Orwell wrote an Homage to Catalonia, very interesting observation. No one I met at this time, doctors, nurses, practicantes, or fellow patients, failed to assure me that a man who is hit through the neck and survives is the luckiest creature alive. Couldn't help thinking it would have been even luckier not to be hit at all. But Orwell, who was a volunteer with the PUM, the Partido Reunido Marxista, he was a volunteer in the socialist militia. He was shot right through the neck, and miraculously, he was not paralyzed, and he survived. And wrote one of the great books about the Spanish Civil War, Homage to Catalonia. So what is superstition? The Oxford Dictionary says, a widely held but unjustified belief in a supernatural causation leading to certain consequences of an action or event, or practice based on such belief. Polls show at least half of Americans admit to being superstitious to one degree or another, and 1/3 believe in astrology. But as Shakespeare wrote, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings. Julius Caesar, Act 1, Scene 3. Seeing all religious practices as superstitions is a common attitude. Is faith comparable to astrology and superstition? Is faith really only superstition? Is faith incompatible with scientific knowledge? You see, superstition and faith and believing God are not the same things. It's difficult to understand God, but God is real, and the evidence for his existence is all around us. We see it in the world he created. The natural world, with all its beauty and creation, is, I think, a window to God's mysteries. We can know something of God the Father through the beauty of his world. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Matthew 6, 28, 29. The Bible says, thou shalt not steal. Surely this protects the waters and the land for all mankind, for future generations. David Gibson wrote, the difference between superstitions and religion is not only the difference between meaning and randomness, between faith and anxiety, but also the difference between belief in a personal, benevolent God and fear of a pitiless Mother Nature. Well, think about it. You either have a pitiless Mother Nature, total anarchy, or a benevolent personal God, or exploited by mumbo-jumbo. Superstition by definition stands beyond us, where religion is part of the human experience and interacts with it. I've walked down streets many times, in New York, London, Glasgow, minding my own business. I've been deep in thought, not paying much attention, where suddenly a slight gleam caught my eye. What was it? It was a penny. When I find a penny like that, the first thing I do is look at the date and think about its journey over the years to the street and then into my hand. There's an old saying, find a penny, pick it up, all day long, good luck. Metals are rare, relatively speaking, and in the days of old, people believed that metals were from God or the gods. Some metals, like copper and gold, are found almost pure in nature. I have in my study a piece of natural copper that my mother and I found in an old mine in New York State in the 1960s. It's fascinating because it's probably millions of years old, and natural copper like that was made into some of the first ancient metal tools and eventually into bronze. So only some metals are found in nature, for example, gold, copper, and then others are alloys, but they have to be found first. We find it, of course, but we did not find a piece of copper by random. We had a book of places where minerals were found, where fossils could be found, and we spent days and weeks over several summers as rock hounds. So we planned ahead. We had some knowledge and education of metals and of muscles, and we were able to narrow the places where we would go. And it took us, I would say, probably 6 weeks over 2 years to find that particular piece. I think it came like in the 5th week of the 2nd year, but it was there. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, no one could endure lasting adversity if we continue to have the same force when it first hit us. We're all tied to Lady Luck by some loose and golden chain, others by a tight one of a baser metal. But what does it matter? We're all held in the same captivity, and those who have bound others and themselves in bonds, unless you think perhaps that the left-hand chain is lighter. One man is bound by high office, another by wealth. Good birth weighs down some, humble origin others. Some bow under the rule of other men, and some under their own. Some are restricted to one place by exile. So you have to get used to your circumstances, complain about them as little as possible, and grasp whatever adventures they offer. No condition is so bitter that a stable mind cannot find some consolation in it. And we see this in Solzhenitsyn, we see this in Epictetus, we see this in Seneca. Long, long ago, people also believe there's a constant battle between the forces of good and evil. Things are often viewed in one of two ways, either good or bad. That's one side of a coin, heads, came to be associated with good, which meant that the other side, tails, must be evil or lucky. The idea that pennies bring luck carried over into other traditions. For example, there's a saying that many brides know: something old, something new, something barred, something blue, and the lucky penny in the shoe. When my grandfather went to sea as a boy, I would say this about 1894, he was about 8 years old. His mother gave him a penny, and she said, "Hold on to it, laddie, and you'll never be penniless." And I still have that penny. I have a few things. He didn't have any possessions, but he passed on a silver half crown that he had in his pocket during Armistice Day, 1918. And he had a penny that he when he went to sea. So it's a 19th century, one of those big English pennies. And he used to always say, a few silver dollars he earned in the 1920s, because he liked to always be paid in hard money, in cash. He collected silver dollars and half dollars. He didn't like paper money. I don't think he ever had a bank account. When he got his paycheck, he would get it all in cash to pay his rent and so on and so forth. And he would get bags of silver and half dollars. And sometimes he had thousands of them. He never had a lot of money, but he liked the idea of having real money. I don't know if it's superstition, but superstitious like traditions and stories about luck. Crossing your fingers, knocking on wood. Most of us don't know where superstitions like these came from. We all have done these things. I have. My mother did. I think she was more likely to do so than my father, who was always coolly rational. Stephen Macri, a lecturer of information interaction at City University London, has a number of studies on luck and serendipity. I think that luck means different things to different people. Some people use it as a synonym for serendipity, Macri said, but others are clear the two were different. Luck was totally out of our control, and there's nothing we can do to influence it. They think that serendipity can't be controlled, but it can be influenced. Macri asked if they did anything to increase their chance for luck. He said they included things like varying their routine, working in different environments and with different people, mixing up things in the workplace, just generally doing things to avoid getting stuck in the same routine. So while luck can't be controlled, people can do a lot to put themselves in a particular place and time and hope. Making good decisions, driving at night, in storms or rains, or exposing themselves to excessive danger for no reason will help one be lucky. An open, positive attitude also makes people more likely to appreciate an opportunity, take advantage of it. Lao Tzu said, "A journey of 1,000 miles starts under one's foot." Perseverance is a powerful and universal truth. The greatest challenges must begin with a single step. You have to keep right to the road, never give up, never die. There's a picture. You can see This is Thomas Munro Sr. in Salonika in 1917. And I have only a few photographs of my grandfather from the First World War, but I have this one, which is interesting because it was taken in April 1917, and at a time of great hope. The news in the Western Front was terrible, but in April 1917 happened, which probably changed my grandfather's life, my life forever. The United States declared war on Germany, and everyone, all the Canadians, all the English, all the Welshmen, all the Frenchmen, all the Greeks, all the Scots, everyone knew that the Allies would win the war. And they also knew, if they were on the Salonika front or in the Struma Valley, they probably would not be transferred back to the Western Front, which was a grim gap of death. And so he felt it turned out to be lucky for him to be in a bad front, but still far from the Western Front. So we called him Old Pop. He used to say, we all have bad luck and good luck. No matter what, you have to carry on. You have to carry on despite everything. Keep right on to the end of the road. Be thankful you're living, and trust your luck, and march to your front like a soldier. Front, front, front like a soldier, which is from Kipling. So here are some soldiers of the Great War. These are Argylls in the Ypres salient. When I think of what they and my grandfather went through, I'm very, very lucky. I always remember I asked my grandfather why he wasn't killed in the war. What did he do not to be killed? And he said, for one thing, he said, you hide behind trees. You take cover. Number one, you take cover. Stay alert. And the other is luck. One of the things my grandfather did was he had to carry supplies from the Menin Road to the front lines. And at one point, they had only one communication trench moving to the front lines at Second Deeps. And he would carry these 50-pound boxes of supplies. But they were so heavy that every once in a while he had to stretch out. And when he did stretch out, the box went above the trench line, and the Germans following him knew the supplies would come up, and they would start to shoot mortar shells. Of course, fortunately, the trench was zigzagged, so it gives you a little bit of protection, and it has to be a direct hit to really get you. And it started raining, and it was raining heavier and heavier. And he thought, boy, what a miserable mess this is today. It was very difficult to move in the muck and the mud. And then, bam! A German mortar shell landed right in front of him. And he looked at it, and looked at it, and he called it the famous dud in the mud because it didn't explode. Now, why was that? Was that because it was just a dud, or because the soil was so soft and so muddy because of the rain that it didn't go off? We don't know. But I do know, because of that bit of luck, he survived. He had a few other close calls, but that one he said was the closest call he ever had. So he used to say, save your luck for when it counts. We're here because we took cover and had a bit of luck. And bad luck too, but better luck than the dinosaurs. And I said, why, Old Pop? He said, because they were big, they were great, but they were wiped out. Rule number one, survive. So it's the highest wisdom to leave some things to mystery. We know some things, but much remains a mystery. I do know when the chips are down, we don't want to be alone, and it's man's nature to seek solace. My Old Pop told stories of living through the German bombardments day after day. His regiment, the Argyll and Southern Highlanders, 36 consecutive days of attack and bombardments. Imagine that, 36 consecutive days. What pulled him through was comradeship and faith. The biggest free thinker in his regiment, after all 30 days, started saying the Hail Mary, and I said to my grandfather, give me them beans. Why? He didn't want to be alone. You think about it, the first 30 days, he said nothing. But after a while, he was there, and so there they were together. My grandfather, his nephew, his best friend. Uh, Only one of them was a practicing Catholic, but there they were all saying the Hail Mary and Our Father together over and over again for hours, because they were so desperate that anything to get their mind off the bombardment. Paul Johnson wrote in a wonderful book, The Quest for God, we may not be able to understand God. We may not be able to believe in him. We may be confused by mysteries, contradictions, improbabilities of faith, and unable to unravel them in our minds. But we can all pray. Is the weapon of the weak, the starving, the helpless, the puzzled, and the unsure. Definitely true. There are times when it seems that there are no answers. But in those moments, that's when we recur to prayer. God hears us. He may not answer the way as we would like, but we should pray again. Prayer is not superstition. It's humility before the great mysteries of the universe. And I admit it. You could say it's like crossing one's fingers. We'll be reading a lot of poetry in the coming days. And I'll ask, what is good poetry? Well, small children naturally enjoy music. I never ask, what's the good of music? Children naturally enjoy poems and songs, rather than limericks and silly stories. They never ask the good of songs. I remember when my son was little, I used to sing to him. We went to the tar pits. He saw all the skeletons of the bears and so on and so forth that had fallen into the tar pit. And so we sang on the way home, just a song that we made up ourselves. The bear fell into the tar pit, the veil fell into the tar pit, the bell fell into the tar pit, and what a sticky mess, and what a sticky mess, and what a sticky mess. The bear fell into the carpet, and what a sticky mess. And so just funny song, because we had an interesting day, and he was fascinated by the fact that all the bears and animals had fallen, and then we went through the whole list of animals falling into the tar pit, and we had a lot of laughs. Limericks and silly stories. Children are of it. But you have to. So what is the use of good poetry? The answer to that question. Remember, like all poems or songs, and you can like a poem or song without understanding it completely. Certainly, I've read Joyce, Finnegan's Wake, and I can't make all of it. I know poems and songs since early boyhood. I'm fond of these, and those I loved at age 6 or 8. But naturally, now I enjoy longer, more mature poems. But we can begin to get answers. We look at poetry that children enjoy. Just like a painting or sculpture can give. The German author Goethe said, one ought to, each day at least, hear a little song, read a poem, a picture, or to speak a few reasonable words. William Hazlitt wrote, eloquence of passion, the most vivid form of expression into the conception of anything, whether pleasurable or painful, mean or dignified, delightful or distressing. Incident of the image and the words with the feeling we have, which we can't get rid of in any other way. It gives instant satisfaction to the thought. This is equally the origin of wit and fancy, of comedy and tragedy, of the sublime and pathetic. Hazlitt. The first pleasure of poetry is the pleasure of following a pattern or repetition of sounds. Everyone enjoys talking. Everyone enjoys jokes and silly puns. Here are some famous examples. The first has rhyme and repetition, wonderful imagery, and the innocent enthusiasm of children. I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. So very simple, and one that many children know. Next, we have a tongue twister, full of alliteration and repetition. A peck, of course, is a traditional unit of capacity in the U.S. In the United States, the peck is used only for dry measures. It's equal to 8 dry quarts or 8.810 liters. To pickle, to preserve food in vinegar or brine. Before refrigeration, pickling was a very important way to preserve food. Peter Piper alludes to a person who may have been a farmer, and so makes the amusing contrast of his name, Piper, with pepper. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. A peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked. If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, what's the peck of pickled peppers Piper picked? Very difficult to say that correctly. You just have fun saying it. Peter and his famous pickled peppers first appeared in print in 1813 in Harris's Peter Piper's Practical Principles of Plain and Perfect Pronunciation. There's no question, so they're studying poetry, reading it out loud, practicing it, practicing speeches, repeating, is a good way to learn how to pronounce English, which is very difficult. Another place of poetry, it's sometimes better than prose to tell a memorable story. Here's a poem that tells a simple story with a twist. And I've known this since early boyhood. 3 birds sat upon a wall, sat upon a wall, sat upon a wall. 3 birds sat upon a wall on a cold and frosty morning. The first bird was crying for his ma, crying for his ma, crying for his ma. The first bird was crying for his ma on a cold and frosty morning. The second bird, he fell and broke his jaw, fell and broke his jaw, fell and broke his jaw. The second bird, he fell and broke his jaw on a cold and frosty morning. The third bird, wasn't there at all, wasn't there at all, wasn't there at all. The third bird wasn't there at all on a cold and frosty morning. So sometimes poetry is a more memorable way of telling a story. The next poem echoes events of the French Revolution. The roots of the story of Jack and Jill are in France. Jack and Jill are said to be King Louis XVI. Jack, who was beheaded, lost his crown, followed by his queen Marie Antoinette, Jill, who came tumbling after. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. And of course, we hardly think of this anymore, but many people all over the world have to fetch water every day. My wife and I have contributed to Children International for many years, and there's times, more than almost 40 years now, and there were times when I would say, we're at the end of the month, we could barely afford to pay our grocery bill, and I would say, well, where can we cut back? I said, should we maybe cut out Children International? We're thinking about it, and so, well, let's think about it. And then we got a letter from the student that we were sponsoring in India, in Bengal, in Calcutta. And he was thanking us for helping him. And he explained that he got a liter of fresh water at school every day. But he never drank it because the school did have water pressure and did have drinking water, potable drinking water. And he brought that liter of water home every day to his parents. And that way his parents could have at least 1 glass of water a day. Because sometimes the water pressure was so low, they'd only get a few drops of water. They'd have to work in the field, maybe borrow a swig of water here and there. And I said to my wife, this is poverty. Sleeping on the floor, no running water, no to wash, but not even enough water to drink. I mean, to be thirsty and suffer thirst every day, that is really poverty. And of course, they had to go. His mother would fetch water sometimes miles away from their home just to get a little water to drink and for cooking. And I said, we can't ever. I said to myself, I'd be ashamed if I bought a steak or went out to buy a bottle of whiskey here. Because I can spend $30 or $40 so easily, and just a little bit of money can help them. And it's true. I mean, I could probably have 2 brand new cars for all the money that I've given to Children International over the years. And so we only have 1 car, free and clear. But those other fancy cars that I don't have, I have instead many, many years of correspondence and pictures of the many students we have sponsored over the years with Children International, some of whom have become teachers. And I feel, in a small way, it's a little contribution to world peace and mutual understanding by sharing with others and helping others, and never flagging. So we've never flagged in giving that. Here's another one. Here's another rhyme that has an allusion to the French Revolution, more directly and very memorable. When I was a little lad, so my mother told me, way hey, Holloway Joe, that if I did kiss the gals, my lips would grow all moldy. Way hey, we Holloway Joe, way hey, we Holloway Joe, way hey, we Holloway Joe. King Louis was the king of France before the Revolution. Way hey, we Holloway Joe. Louis was the king of France before the Revolution. Way hey, Holloway Joe. Until they cut off his head and spoiled his constitution. Way hey, Holloway Joe. I've never forgotten that Louis was the king of France. And of course, Constitution has two meanings. It means the Constitution of his country and his Constitution of his health. So besides storytelling, poetry is a mnemonic device, a memory aid. Words put in a pattern are easier to remember. Here's one of the oldest English proverbs. It has not a single Latinate word, so it's more than 1,000 years old. Early to bed and early to rise, make one healthy, wealthy, and wise. Urban and a humorous variant. Early to rise and early to bed makes the male healthy, wealthy, and dead. I would never learn the lengths of the months my mother hadn't taught me. 30 days, half September, April, June, and November. All the rest of 31, excepting February alone. And that has 28 days clear and 29 in each leap year. The leap year, which comes once in 4, gives February 1 day more. This comes from the oral tradition and hundreds of years old. Shakespeare and his children probably knew this rhyme. The word hath gives us a clue as to its age. It's the old third-person singular we find in Shakespeare and the Bible. Poetry also expresses the general human experience. It tells how men and women, young and old, have thought, how they've loved, how they've lost, how they've wept. The benefit of a poem or song, it helps us by giving us words. This is one of my father's favorite poems. I read it out during his funeral in 2014. William Corey made this incomparable translation from the Greek of the African poet Callimachus of Cyrene, 3rd century BC. They told me, Heraclius, they told me you were dead. They brought me bitter news to hear and bitter tears to shed. I wept as I remembered how often you and I had tired the sun with talking and sent him down the sky. Now thou art lying, my dear old carrion guest, a handful of grey ashes, long, long ago at rest. Still are thy pleasant voices, thy nightingales awake. For death, he taketh all away, but them he cannot take. A wonderful imagery here. The imagery of the sun setting, the hours passing by in pleasant comradeship. And of course, his poems, his songs, the nightingales. And so the memory of the friend and the memory of his songs, the memory of their friendship, it would never could be taken from us. And of course, it's immortal. We all have challenges and disappointments in life. We will know sickness for ourselves and the death of loved ones. We feel an intense emotion, but we won't know what to say. We'll be lost for words. But the bard and the songster can put our feelings into words and provide some consolation. And this poetry comes close to religion. Many, many times in battles or concentration camps or hospitals, besides deathbeds and even in deathbeds, men and women have repeated a very ancient poem, only 6 verses long, found comfort in the fact as no words of their own would have brought them. It begins, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We need to look at poetry and literature in this life. Poetry and literature are amusements or mere decorations. They're aids for living when life is difficult. The poets give us words. They have loved, they have suffered, they have lost, they have won, they felt pride, they felt shame, they have known sickness and health. We are dumb, unable to speak, but the poets can speak for us. Poetry can help us understand ourselves and other people as well. Longfellow had a fine song called My Lost Youth. I remember the gleams and glooms that dart across a schoolboy's brain. Song in the silence in the heart, then in part our prophecies, and in part our longing, wild and vain. And the voice of that fitful song sings on and is never still. A boy's will is the wind's will, and the thoughts of youth are long, long thoughts. There are things of which I may not speak. There are dreams that cannot die. There are thoughts that make the strong heart weak and bring a pallor into his cheek and a mist before the eye. The words of that fatal song comes over me like a chill. A boy's will is the wind's will, and the thoughts of youth are long, long thoughts. Gilbert Hyatt wrote, we ourselves, at some time with the mysterious future, may have to endure and try to understand some experience absolutely outside our present scope, suffering some kind of unforeseen and magnificent duty, a splendor, triumph. Many men has lived happily until something made him think for the first time of committing suicide. Such a man will be able to understand himself and rise above the thought if he knows music that Rachmaninoff wrote when he too had such thoughts and conquered them. The story of Rachmaninoff is interesting, and I've always been fascinated by Rachmaninoff because my father and grandmother actually saw him perform in person, and his story is very interesting. Rachmaninoff was very successful and quite prosperous in Russia before the Russian Revolution. And during the revolution, he lost all his savings. All his property was confiscated. Many of his friends were killed or murdered by the communists. He came to America as a penniless immigrant in 1918. He was a mature man at that time, without friends or connections. Then he fell sick with the Spanish flu, and more of his friends and neighbors died, including his son-in-law. He recovered in 1919 and began to earn money as a concert pianist. And just by dint of musical talent, he rebuilt his life and gained financial security. Before he died, he became a U.S. citizen. I always remember my grandfather said he closed his concerts with playing his version of the Star Spangled Banner. He was just so grateful to be in America. A beautiful version, and there's a recording of it out there, Rachmaninoff's Star Spangled Banner. Even if we're not called to endure such extremes as Rachmaninoff, there are those about us, perhaps very close to us, who will face situations: drug abuse, alcoholism, a car crash, a mugging, sudden wealth, divorce, the loss of a job, sudden poverty and humiliations. In English, there are orphans and widows, but there's a word for parents who lose a child. I know several people in our lives recently. One lost a child, 30 years old, who was brilliant, had a degree in electrical engineering, had all kinds of education, all kinds of success, very attractive, very wonderful, very kind person, but did not have the gift of health and succumbed to cancer at age 30. We knew another of my daughter's girlfriends who died, I think, at 12 or 13. And she was one of the nicest and kindest of all of her friends, an unforgettable person. Her name was Krista. And she was taken from the parents. Tam O'Shanter, Burns wrote, but pleasures are like poppy spread, you seize the flower, its bloom is shed, or like the snowfall on the river, a moment white, then melts forever. Poetry will give us knowledge and experience to help us sympathize with others. Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. William Yeats. Gilbert Hyatt said, to create such sympathy is one of the deepest functions of poetry, the power and strength it will need all of our lives. Poetry and songs are intensely valuable to me, and it always has been. It's my antidote to depression, fatigue, and loneliness. A silken golden thread that runs through my life. I've often said the only time I forget my mother is dead, I play the piano and sing the songs she taught me. Oh, sing to me the old Scot sangs, in a braid old Scottish tongue, the songs my father wished to hear, the songs my mother sang, when she sat beside my cradle, or crooned me on her knee. Oh, I would not sleep, she sang so sweet, the old Scot sangs to me. Sing mair, sing lang of ye sangs, for ilka yen can tell of joys and sorrows in the past, where memory loves to dwell. Though hair grow grey and limbs grow old, until the day I die, a blessed tongue that sings the songs the old Scot sangs to me. Sometimes we're demoralized, see hope for the future. The next song I learned by listening to records with my Scottish grandfather. It's by Scottish comedian and singer Sir Harry Lauder. His only son, Captain John Lauder, volunteered for service in the Highland Regiment, the Argyll and Southern Highlanders. He was killed in action in France just after Christmas on December 26, 1916. Sir Harry Lauder dedicated this song to his son and his comrades in the Allied armies. Sometimes you have to persevere and be brave. Every road through life is a long, long road, filled with joys and sorrows too. Keep right on the road, keep right on to the end. So the way be long, that your heart be strong, keep right on round the bend. Though you're tired and weary, still journey on, till you come to a happy abode, where all the love you've been dreaming of will be there at the end of the road. Sigurd Sassoon was a decorated soldier of the First World War. Like other poets of the Great War, he survived the war by almost 50 years. I keep such music in my brain, no din this side of death can quell, glory exulting over pain, and beauty garlanded in hell. My dreaming spirit will not heed the roar of the guns that would destroy my life on the gloom that can read, proud surging melodies of joy. To the world's end I went, and found death in his carnival of glare. But in my torment I was crowned, and music dawned above despair. We will all suffer personal losses in this life, because no man and no woman is master of the line of his or her life. We're all mortal. The Bible reminds man constantly of his mortality. Of course, Genesis 3:19. By the sweat of your face you will eat bread, till you return to the ground. Because from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. I close with a beautiful poem, and to music by Austrian poet Franz von Schober, set to music by Schubert. Sacred art, how often in the dark hours, when the savage ring of life tightens round me, have you kindled, warm heart, the love in my heart. Have transported me to a better world. Transported me to a better world. Often a sigh has escaped from your harp, a sweet sacred harmony of yours has opened up the heavens to better times for me. Oh, sacred art, I thank you for that. Oh, sacred art, I thank you. So here's an idea, and I'll do this with you. Find an anthology. I have an anthology, and I'll share that with you. Find a poem. Find a quotation, perhaps a favorite poem, an anonymous ballad or an author. Any poem, any song. Read it. Write it down. Say it. Memorize it. And when you feel down in a funk, you can say it to yourself or look it up or find it. Then you can yourself again in your tongue. You'll find that poetry is magic. Poetry restores love. It restores joy. It connects to memory. Gives us laughter. But above all, poetry restores our souls and helps us carry on in life and perhaps help us feel gratitude for our health, our friends, our country, our family, our school, our world. Now we're going to The Limits of Art by CAIRNS, Huntington CAIRNS. Fascinating book, and one of the great anthologies of the 20th century. And it has a wonderful quotation to start by Parrhasius. And Parrhasius was a great painter of the ancient world, and I think of, and a critic. Most, as far as we know, I mean, most or all of his paintings have vanished and been destroyed. But he has a very interesting quotation in Greek. This I say, even though they hear and believe not. I declare that the clear limits of this art have been found under my hand, and the goal is set that may not be overpassed, though there is no human work which fault may not be found. And the idea is that here in this book you have the limits of art. All of these are the most excellent fragments. And the idea is, if you can appreciate and understand these, it's something you can compare anything to. So you really can't know what is great unless you have read great poems. Here's one, a quote in the Homer, the Iliad, translated by William Cowper. Surely, in the delicate touches of pathos, Homer excels all poets, such as Samuel Rogers said. Yet never heard I once hard speech from thee, or taunt morose. And if it ever chanced that male or female of thy father's house blame me, and even if herself the queen, for in the king whatever befell, I found always a father, thou hast interposed a gentle temper, and thy gentle speech to soothe them. And this is Helen of Troy, saying that there was the character of Priam and of Hector. They did not reproach her for the war and all the problems, because they realized, after all, she was not completely at blame. I mean, she had been kidnapped by Paris, and it's interesting. It says much about the character of Hector and of their families, the nobility of them, makes them that they did not blame her for all the difficulties, because after all, Helen didn't make the choice of invading Troy with all these ships, and so someone else did that. Here's another quote, which was called by J.W. McKay a perfect miracle of language. It was when the daughter of Pandaeus, the nightingale of the greenwood, sings sweetly when spring is newly come, and she sits perfect amid the thick leafage of the trees, and many trilling notes pours forth her rich voice wailing for her child, dear Ictalus, whom she had one day slain with the sword unwittingly. Ictalus, the son of King Theseus. Even so my heart sways to and fro in doubt, whether to abide with my son and keep all things safe, my possessions, my slaves, and my great high-roofed house, respecting the bed of my husband and the voice of the people. Now with him, whoever is the best of the Achaeans, who woos me in the halls and offers bride gifts past counting. So even Penelope is being tempted. I mean, here she's waiting and waiting for Odysseus to return, but even she has her doubts and is tempted, what she should do. Remember, the years are passing for all. I often thought that Penelope must be an attractive woman, certainly in her 30s by this time. I mean, if she had her children, Telemachus, when she was 13 or 14 or 15 years old, she'd be at least 35 by this time, which was mature for that time. 5-year-old woman still be very attractive, but there's no question at that time she's running out of time. She doesn't have many years left. The description of Penelope by Homer. My favorite poems are the Ruby of Archaeum, and always loved it. And McNeill Dixon wrote in the English Parnassus in 1916, "O my theme, the mystery of life and death, the flux beyond arrest of human things, the sorrowful and swift flight of beauty and joy was a theme as old as the world itself. Nor likely to lose its power, so subtly does it rend the bittersweet of reflective existence. The thought of beauty that must be loved and yet must be relinquished. An easy fear wholly be banished from the hearts of men, that their exile from the joys of conscious being will be without return. The only affections they have known can never be again be known, and will remain which lasts, its most finished expression of the spirit's darker broodings, its most searching music in minor key." And I'll come back to this again, but there are definitely parts that are just very, very powerful. Myself, when young, did eagerly frequent doctor and saint and heard great argument. About and about, but before came out the same door, whither I went. With them the seed of wisdom did I sow, and my own brought to make it grow. And this was all the harvest that I reaped. I came like water, and like wind I go. So we all come like water, and like wind I go. Sort of reminds us a little bit of the Bible. We're returning to dust. So here, dust in the wind. Here's a beautiful little fragment. A book of verses beneath the bough, a jug of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou beside me singing in the wilderness, a wilderness where paradise enow. And the idea that you can be very happy with just small things if you have love and companionship. And here's one that my grandfather loved very much. Ah, beloved, fill the cup that clears today of past regret and future fears. Tomorrow, why tomorrow I may be myself with yesterday's 7,000 years. And of course, everything lasts and things are gone. And it's the idea that the world was created 7,000 years ago. It's a metaphor for the past, but not just yesterday, not just the past, but I may be myself with yesterday's 7,000 years. Go. Oh, threats of hell and hopes of paradise. One thing is certain at least. This life flies. One thing is certain, and the rest is lies. The flower that once is blown forever dies. Strange, is it not, that of the myriads who have passed the door of darkness through, no one returns to tell us the road which to discover we must travel to. But helpless pieces of the game he plays, upon this checkerboard of night and days, hither and hither moves, and checks and slays, one by one, back in the closet lays. The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on. Nor all your picture and nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all your tears wash out a word of it. Yon rising moon looks for us again. Oft hereafter will she wax and wane. Oft hereafter, rising, look for us through the same garden, on in vain. And when like her, O Saki, you shall pass among the guest stars scattered on the grass, and in your joyous errand reach the spot where I made one, turned down an empty glass. And of course, Saki is the servant, the cup carrier, and this is where H. Munro got his nickname. And I always remember it was very sad. He volunteered for service. He was in the Western Front. And remember, my grandfather told stories that when recruits would come to the front lines, one of the first things they told them was, never light a cigarette at night in the trenches. Do not smoke in an exposed area at any time, because the light would attract snipers. And one of the things they did, they made up a little dummy with a helmet, and they placed a lit cigarette in the mouth of the dummy and lifted up above the trenches. And he'd tell the young men to look at it, say, watch, and how long it would take. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but never more than half an hour. There would be sniper shots right at it. And sometimes they went right through the head of the dummy. And the idea was, do not attract attention at night. And that's how H.A. Munro died. He said, put out that damn light. Put out that damn light. And the shot fired off, and he was killed by a stray bullet. Perhaps by bad luck, or perhaps someone lit a light near him. We don't really know, but he was only in his 40s. I mean, so you think of all the wonderful books and poems he could have written if he had lived for a longer time. And here we have some lines. The Battle of Valmy, which was in the French Napoleonic Wars. And Goethe said this: here and now begins a new epic of world history, and you gentlemen can say that you were there. This is Goethe on the Battle of Valmy. And Oswald Spengler wrote in The Decline of the West, no general, no diplomat, let alone philosophers, ever so directly felt history become. It is the position that any man ever uttered about a historical act in the moment of its accomplishment. Battle of Valmy. Here and now begins a new epic of world history, and you gentlemen can say you were here. And of course, in Limits of Art, I have all of them in the original language, and my German is good enough to say that. Von hier und heute geht eine Epoche der Weltgeschichte aus. Ihre Grundsagen ist seit Daben gewesen. Here and now begins a new epic of world history, and you gentlemen can say that you were there. That's Goethe. Henry Perry said that this is perhaps the most beautiful sonnet in the English language. By Keats. He had been writing and reading about Shakespeare. And this actually was written on a blank page in Shakespeare's poems. So he was sort of inspired by the reading of Shakespeare. John Keats, 1795, 1821. Bright star, would I steadiest as thou art, not in the lone splendor hung all off the night, and watching with eternal lids apart, like nature's patient, sleepless eremite. Moving waters at their priest-like task, a pure ablution round earth's human shores, or gazing on the new fallen mask of snow upon the mountains and the moors. No, yet still steadfast, still unchangeable, pure upon thy fair love's ripening breast, to feel forever its soft and swell, awake forever in a sweet unrest, still, still to hear her tender taken breath, and so live forever, or else swoon to death. Beautiful imagery there. Soft fallen mask of snow upon moors and mountains. Beautiful imagery there of Keats. And we have more here. And I've always loved Dryden. I have a wonderful book, the Dryden's translation of Virgil. And it's interesting when you read about Thomas Jefferson, read about John Adams, you read Samuel Johnson, and when they refer to Virgil, they're usually referring to Dryden's translation. And Dryden's translation may not be the most accurate, but it's one of the most lovely. And I won't be reading that here, but he made wonderful lyric translations of classical poems. And they're paraphrased, but they're paraphrased translations that are almost independent poems. And this is 29th Ode of the third book of Horace. Descended of an ancient line that long the Tuscan scepter swayed, make haste to meet the generous wine, whose piercing for thee delayed, the rosy wreath already made, the artful hands prepare, a fragrant Syrian oil that shall perfume thy hair. When the wine sparkles from afar, the well-natured friend cries, come away. Make haste and leave thy business and thy care. No mortal interest can be worth thy stay. Leave for a while thy country seat, and to be great indeed forget the nauseous pleasures of the great. Make haste and come and thy cloying, thy turret that surveys from high, the smoke and wealth and the noise of Rome, all the busy pageantry that wise men scorn and fools adore. Come thy soul a loose, and taste the pleasures of the poor. Sometimes 'tis grateful to be rich, to a short vicissitude, a fit of poverty, a savory dish, a homely treat, where all is plain, where all is neat, without the stately spacious room, the Persian carpet, or the Tyrian loom, the cloudy foreheads of the great. The sun is the lion mounted high, the Syrian star sparks from afar, with the sultry breath infects the sky, the ground below is parched, the heaven above us fry, the shepherd drives his fainting flock beneath the covert of a rock, and seeks refreshing rivulets nigh, the Sylvians to their shades retire, those very shades and streams new shadow streams require, and want a cooling breeze of wind to fan the raging fire. Thou who befits the new Lord Mayor, what the city faction dare, what the Gallic arms will do, Gallic French arms will do, what the quivering overbearing foe are anxiously inquisitive to know, but God has wisely hid from human sight the dark decrees of future fate, and sown the seeds in the depth of night. He laughs at all the hours of state, where mortals search too soon and fear too late. Enjoy the present smiling, put out fortune's power. The tide of business, like running stream, is sometimes high and sometimes low. A quiet ebb or tempter's flow, always in extreme. Now there is this gentle course, it keeps within the meadow bed. Anon it lifts aloft the head and bears down all with impetuous force. And the trees of trunks come rolling down, and sheep in their folds come together down. But house and homestead into the seas are born, and rocks from their old foundations torn, and woods meet them with winds the scattered honors mourn. Happy the man, and happy he alone, who can call the day his own, who secure within can say, tomorrow do thy worst, for I have lived today. Be fair or foul or rain or shine, the joys I possessed in spite of fate and are mine. For heaven itself can pass to have power. Of what has been, I've had my hour. Fortune, that with malicious joy does man her slave oppress, proud of her office to destroy, it's seldom pleased to bless. Still, various and constant still, with inclination to be ill, promotes, degrades, delights in strife, and makes a lottery of life. I enjoy her while she's kind, when she dances in the wind, and shakes the wind man and will not stay. I puff the prospect away. The little and the much she gave, quietly resigned, content with poverty my soul I am, and shoe and rags will keep me warm. What is it to me, who never sail in her unfaithful sea, if storms arise and clouds grow black, the masts split and threaten wreck? The greedy merchant fear for his ill-gotten gain, and pray to the gods that will not hear, while debate winds and billows bear his wealth into the main. For me, secure then from fortune's blows, secure of what I cannot lose. In my small pinnace I can sail, condemning all the blustery roar, and running with the merry gale, with my friendly stars my safety seek, with the winding little creek, and see the storm ashore. Commonly said is one of the great poems in English, and many people quote it, the ill-gotten gains. And beautiful, the idea that some people have great boats, great merchants going for great power, and him in his little life, he has a small pinnace. He has a small pinnace that he can sail, and he's just happy to have. The idea is that if you can have some control of your life, and you have your own little life, your own little place, you can be happy. Happy the man, and happy he alone, who can call the day his own. So beautiful adaptation and a paraphrase of Horace, but it's become something new. So these are some quotations. I will say a few things about The Limits of the Art by Huntington Cairns. It's very interesting because he has everything done chronologically. And he basically has, from the ancients, the Greeks and the Romans, Western literature, all the way to the early 20th century. I think one of the later authors that he has is James Joyce. So he doesn't have anything from the 30s or 40s, for example. He has Lincoln. He has a quotation from Lincoln, of course, to get his book address, but does not have Churchill, which I think certainly could be added to this if we wanted to. And it's interesting, we go to look for it, you think, well, the Bible is older than Homer, but it's interesting, he did not believe that the Bible was an influence on Homer or on Virgil, so on and so forth, because the traditions had not joined yet. And so he puts the Bible in the 17th century, contemporaneous with Shakespeare, and then has some great quotations from the King James Bible, because he considered the King James Bible to be the great English translation, which is certainly true. But I would say, though, that certainly the Vulgate had a literary influence on, for example, St. Augustine. Some of the authors who are here, he has Boethius, St. Augustine, and they certainly were influenced by the Bible, at least through the Vulgate. So I think that if I had to do it again, he could have added some, quotations from the Vulgate and had references to the Bible earlier. But once again, everyone has their own decisions and makes their own decisions on this. And that's what Huntington Cairns did. And it is an impressive anthology, which has quotes from Irish, Scottish, English, Spanish, French, German, Italian, Russian, ancient Latin, ancient Greek. Tremendous anthology that anyone could go and love. Here's Ye banks and braes of all bonny Doon, how can ye bloom so fresh and fair? How can ye chant, ye little birds, and I, Sir Willie, for care. Thou brack my head, thou warbling bird, that wantons through the flowering thorn. That reminds me of departed joys, departed never to return. Oft hae I rove by bonny Doon, to see the rose and woodbine twine. For ilka bird sang, oh, it's love, and finally said that I have mine. Licksome heart pulled a rose, full sweet upon its thorny tree, and I, my false lover, stole the rose, and he left the thorn with me. Beautiful imagery there of how a lost love or an abused love, they leave you with pain. Burns is a beautiful, beautiful poems. Kenmure was a Jacobite, and he said, Kenmure's on the wall, Willie. Oh, Kenmure's on the wall. Kenmure's on the wall. Kenmure's Lord's the bravest Lord that e'er Galloway saw. Success to Kenmure's band, Willie. Success to Kenmure's band. There's no a hair that fears a wig that rides by Kenmure's hand. Here's a health to Kenmure and wine, Willie. Here's to Kenmure's health and wine. There's not a coward Kenmure's blood, nor yet of Gordon's line. Kenmure's lads are men, Willie. Oh, Kenmure's lads are men. Their hearts and swords are met true, that their foes shall ken. They'll live or die with fame, Willie. They'll live or die with fame. By sun we're sanding victory. Make name. Here's to him that's far awa, Willie. Here's to him that's far awa. Here's to the floor I love best. The rose that's like the snow, like the snow. And of course, we know that many of these Jacobites lost, and their properties were confiscated and forfeited, and so they were gone. This is one of the loveliest poems. My mother loved this poem, and there are many musical versions of it. A fond kiss, and then we sever. A farewell, and then forever. Deep in heart-wrung tears I'll pledge thee. Warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee. Who shall say that fortune grieves him, while the star of hope she leaves him? Me nae cheerful twinkle lights me, Doctor spare around me benights me. I'll never blame my martial fancy, nothing could resist my Nancy. But to see her was to love her, love but her, and love forever. Had we never loved so blindly, had we never loved so kindly, never met or never parted, we had never been broken-hearted. Fare thee weel, thou first and dearest, fare thee weel, thou best and dearest. Thine be ever joy and treasure, peace, enjoyment, love and pleasure. I fair kiss, fond kiss, then we sever. I farewell, alas, forever. Deep in heart-run tears I'll pledge thee, warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee. And had we never loved so kindly, had we never loved so blindly, never met, never parted, had we never been broken-hearted. But sometimes this love can be, one meets people in life. Happened to me a few times in my life. You meet someone, and there's an attraction, and but I think it's important to be honest at all times, and find out that this person is married. It happened to me a few times. I would try to befriend a young woman and find out that she was married. But I can tell you, me, when I found out she was married, I respected that, and didn't ask them out for dates again after that. But sometimes you have those moments, and the better than love and lost than never have loved at all. Burns' sympathies were with the abolitionists of his time, and people forget that strong abolitionist movement in Britain, and it was Britain that first abolished the slave trade and then pressed it with the Royal Navy. And so Burns wrote about that. The Slave's Lament. It was in sweet Senegal, the foes enthralled and slave, for the lands of Virginia, Virginia, oh. Torn from that lovely shore, must never see it more, and alas, I am weary, weary, oh. Torn from that lovely shore, and must never see it more, for alas, I am weary, weary, oh. All on that charming coast, no bitter snow and frost, like the hands of Virginia, Virginia, oh. Their streams forever flow, their flowers forever blow, and alas, I am weary, weary, oh. Their streams forever flow, and their flowers forever blow, alas, I am weary, weary, oh. The burden I must bear, or the cruel scourge I fear, in the land of Virginia, Virginia, oh. I think of my friends most dear, the bitter, bitter tear, and alas, I am weary, weary, oh. I think of the friends most dear, with the bitter, bitter tear, alas, I am weary, weary, oh. And Burns didn't know much about Africa. I mean, he just had a garden with flowers always growing and so. But the idea of slavery and the idea of being permanently separated from one's family and one's culture, you know, must be absolutely horrifying. Imagine being in a place where no one could speak your native language. Imagine to be in a place where you don't have a single friend. I knew some Holocaust survivors in the New York area when I grew up as a boy. And I knew this case of these two cousins who married. And they were the only survivors of the town and the school where they went. And they really weren't very close, but they met after the war, and they told a story that, I'll call him Isaac, he heard his name being called, and then he saw someone, and he recognized his cousin. I think she was his second cousin or something like this. They'd met a few times, spoken a few times, and he called her Ruth, and they walked together and embraced and kissed and married, and they were married for over 50 years. But one of the things they said is it was such a wonderful thing to have someone actually know your name and call your name, because every teacher, every classmate, every parent, every relative they had in their small little town of thousands of people in Poland, they all were killed. And one of the greatest things was to actually know someone who could speak your language. I suppose they spoke Yiddish, and remembered you and knew him. Can you imagine being in a world where nobody speaks your language, nobody knows your name? That's very, very sad. We all need to have some family, some friends, some companionship, and so forth. No one can live completely isolated. I mean, that's a kind of like torture, like being in solitary confinement. Here's one I've known since I was a child. I've seen the manuscript at Burns Cottage, and this is very famous. We know Abraham Lincoln wrote this because he named one of his sons William Wallace. It's Robert Bruce's March to Bannockburn, and he's telling them that they bled with Wallace. Squats wha Haywa Wallace bled, squats when Bruce is afton led. Welcome to your gory bed, or to victory. Now's the day and now's the hour. See the front of battle lure. See approach power, chains and slavery. What will be a traitor knave? What can fill a coward's grave? What's a basis be a slave? Let him turn away. What's for Scotland's king and law? Freedom's sword strongly draw. Freemen stand, freemen fall. Let him on with me. By oppression's woes and pains, by your sons in servile chains, we will drain our veins, but they shall be free. Lay the proud usurpers low, tyrants fall in every foe, liberties in every blow. Let us fool or die. Famous Scots Way by Robert Burns. And of course, my love is like a red rose, it's newly sprung in June. My love is like the melody, it's sweetly played in tune. As fair thou art, my bonny lass, so deep in love am I. And I will love still, my dear, till all the seas gang dry, till the dry. Till all the seas gang dry, my dear, and the rocks melt with the sun. Now be still, my dear, while the sands of life shall run. A fare thee weel, my only love, a fare thee weel a while, and I will come again, my love, though it were 10,000 miles. And of course, beautiful imagery of the red rose. Love is like music. And the idea that you'll love them forever. But he doesn't say forever, he says, till all the seas gang dry. Till all the seas gang dry and the rocks melt with the sun. Until the rocks are gone. And so his love is immortal. And of course, he realizes that he himself cannot hold that love. But he says, while the sands of life shall run. And of course, the sand dial, an hour dial right there. Beautiful imagery of Burns. You will love, I'll love thee still, my dear, while the sands of life shall run. And of course, but in a way, his love is immortal through the poem itself. Very beautiful. And of course, my father recited that at his wedding. So did my grandfather, and so did I. And so it's a poem that has a lot of, and here's another one, which is very famous. Many years ago, we went to Culloden, which was in the north of Scotland, and we're interested to know, and we learned about, Cumberland, the Duke of Cumberland, and so on. And I was helping, doing something for Andrew Roberts, his book on George III, and we were talking about Cumberland. He said, why is it that Cumberland is so hated in Scotland? That it's not just a matter of that Cumberland is hated. He was hated for being really rough. For example, there's a famous in Culloden where the had surrendered also, and General Rolfe refused. But why Cumberland was hated was he went on to basically indiscriminately kill hunters, even those who were family members, loyalists of Hanoverians. Why? He was so disliked, and he's called the Bloody Butcher. Not only did he kill prisoners but also he burned the homes of people who were the families of loyalists, and he had his soldiers indiscriminately killed hunters, some of whom were neutral or had been loyal. And this is why he was hated. Not only did he kill Jacobites, but he killed everybody. And he indiscriminately showed his heavy hand. And this is why there will never be a statue. I think there's a statue to Cumberland in London. I remember seeing it once, but there'll never be a statue to Duke of Cumberland in Scotland. Certainly not at Culloden. There are some sayings, and we'll come back for more on another day. So hopefully you have some enjoyment there, and goodbye.